Welcome to the Together.eu Ireland podcast. We are a community of people who believe in democracy and who want to give it real meaning as the next European elections approach. Together.eu is a project run by the European Parliament, dedicated to getting as many people as possible involved in the democratic life of Europe. It is a community of individual citizens across the EU. This week, we will be talking with MEP Barry Andrews and University of Limerick's Diarmuid Scully. So you're very welcome. We have MEP Barry Andrews and we have Professor Diarmuid Scully from the University of Limerick joining us on the podcast this evening. So welcome to you both.
Thanks very much indeed, Deirdre.
And I'll start with you, Barry, because the elections are really coming up now. The 7th of June isn't too far away. And I suppose, the first question, and I'm sure you've gotten asked this quite a few times, but just quite simply, why are you running again for the elections?
I really think we're living in dangerous times, frankly. And I ran, first of all, in 2019. I'd been out of politics for about 10 years. I had no intention to go back into politics, but Brexit really made me think about it again, particularly, because I see Brussels as much more a centre of gravity for Irish politics than had been the case. And losing our British ally made our Brussels a much bigger proposition, and so that's why I got in. That now I think now while I'm running is because I think these are pivotal elections, and who we send to Brussels really matters. 80% of our laws originate decisions taken in Brussels, and very often you hear commentators call it a second order election, and I think that's not fair. I think maybe it was true 15-20 years ago, but the European Union and the European Parliament in particular has acquired powers that it's beginning to exercise, actually. And so, we have to take seriously the people we send there. So I'm presenting a very positive campaign, which is around my record, but also my commitment to the work that I do in trade, in international trade, the work that I do in development. And I've also tried to put housing on the European agenda. It's a very sort of emerging area for the European Union, much the way that health was about 5 years ago. An incredible amount has been achieved on the health agenda, despite it not being a member state, despite it being a member state competence. But so they're the areas that I'm anxious to work in. Also in energy and climate, these are areas of significant importance to me. And finally, I suppose defence is going to be a very serious issue for the European Union in the decade ahead.
Definitely. And I suppose it's interesting, housing, not being, we'll say, on the European agenda for now, and yet hearing, obviously in Ireland, having the housing crisis for as long as we've had it, it's quite top on everyone's priorities when they are going to vote. And I suppose, I'm hearing it a lot, and I guess I'd like to know how you kind of propose putting that onto the European agenda.
Well, I think I've already put it on the European agenda. I published a report a year and a half ago, which was authored by Housing Europe, and it compares Dublin to other capital cities and tried to draw out ideas for funding, ideas for the operation of social and affordable housing, ideas about how you finance social and affordable housing at a state level. Some very interesting ideas emerged in that report. And I think, I've asked my group that we would have a specific committee set up after the elections that would draw up a strategic plan as to how Europe can add value in this area. It is a common European issue. And in fact, Housing Europe asked me to launch their European election manifesto in Brussels a couple of months ago, which I did with 2 other MEPs. So and we have to be careful, however, not to overpromise, because most of the levers in relation to housing are at home. But again, I'll refer to health. 5 years ago, nobody would have taken seriously the idea that health would be, at a European level. Now we're talking about a European Health Union. I think we can see, as a small member state, the benefits that accrue to us from procurement of vaccines at a European level. Also the work of the European Medicine Agency, the digital COVID certificate, various other things that were done at a European level during COVID, which I think now provide us with the energy to push forward with the European Health Union, and particularly things like the Beating Cancer strategy. We're at a massive disadvantage as a small country. We don't have clinical trials at scale. We don't have research and innovation at scale. And now we have this health data space at a European level, which is very, very interesting. And also funding from Horizon for research into cancer. So smaller member states are really benefiting from these developments. And I think it's not unreasonable to read across that Europe could add value in housing. It's the biggest issue for many, many young people in many member states, not just in Ireland. Ireland has, typical characteristics for our situation here, but there's a lot of evidence that the lack of social and affordable housing is really driving resentment, intergenerational inequality, and it's something that Europe needs to address. Social Europe is something that a lot of people feel very strongly about. So I think we're pushing an open door on this, frankly.
And Barry, just to come in there, I suppose a question for you as well, Diarmuid.
Is this about the Munster hurling championship now?
No, not at all, Barry.
We have a very serious disadvantage now.
Well, we're still purely political matters. I suppose we in Together.eu, when we would have started off, and we would have seen the different trends of the makeup of the European Parliament. How do you think over the next 5 years the European Union as a whole is going to navigate this whole rise in populism and nationalism to, I suppose, address it between now and the next elections in 2029? Do you think we do need to make some changes? Because it's definitely an issue that's coming up on a lot of conversations.
Yeah, I think each of the institutions are going to have a different complexion, really, politically. Parliament is going to be a bit more right wing, and it's not just by the right wing parties growing. It's the other parties taking a more right wing approach. So like my own party, I find that some of my colleagues that I would see as more progressive have not made it onto their national lists. They essentially deselected as the parties move to the right. And one of the major parties we have in our group, VVD in the Netherlands, are part of the new Dutch government, which is a right-wing thing. I mean, these are, I understood to be red lines for our party. Now, in fairness to our party leader, Valérie Hare, French from the Macron group, she said that we won't tolerate their membership, VVD's membership. That's Mark Rutte's party. So, these are kind of liberal parties that are beginning to coalesce with, fascistic, misogynistic, right-wing groups. So it's not just that those parties are growing. It's also that the centre parties are becoming more tolerant of these political ideologies. So I'm really worried about the Parliament. And at the Commission level, then, of course, each of the governments will be asked to nominate commissioners in the usual way. And as we have more right-wing governments, we're going to have more right-wing commissioners, and equally we have the council will have that change in complexion. So it is a real worry, and essentially the European Union really prides itself in the defense of the rule of law, and the rule of law is all about protecting minorities. It's saying that might isn't right. It's about equality for everybody, particularly those who are vulnerable or on the margins of society. And if that's eroded, and it often gets eroded in a very almost unnoticed incremental way, but if that is eroded at a European level, I think we really have a massive challenge. And so I think we need to take Europe much seriously. We have to take these elections more seriously, collectively, just in Ireland, but also across Europe. I mean, I would say if there wasn't local elections on the same day next Friday, tomorrow fortnight, the turnout for the European elections in Ireland would be miserable, maybe mid-30s. Local elections generate political interest and activity, and candidates bring people into the polling station. A lot of people are looking at their local election candidates, and then they see there's another piece of paper to fill in. So yeah, we have to take it more seriously. We need more media coverage of what's happening in the European Parliament. We're always trying to get onto national media to explain what we're doing, but it doesn't happen until we get closer to the elections. And then people, don't be surprised then when they're very cynical about it. Oh, we don't see it for 5 years. Just carry on. So I know that, I profoundly disagree with some of the other 12 MEPs that represent Ireland, but I know they all work very hard. They really do. They really are committed to their political viewpoint. and work very long hours and are very dedicated. But that doesn't come across, unfortunately, because all of the coverage is in the Dáil. But as I mentioned earlier, so much of our laws come from Europe, and we're really missing out on that. And it will come at a cost. People see it as an opportunity to kick the government on national issues and don't take a strategic approach to it. So it's a worry.
If I can comment on that, and very good question, Daniel. I think there are various straws in the wind, and they're going in somewhat different directions. On the one hand, the cordon sanitaire that was there around right-wing populist parties has been breached, and there's no doubt about that. And it's been breached in Sweden, where they're now supporting the government, and it's been breached in the Netherlands, where they're going to be a very major part of the government, and indeed elsewhere. And exactly what Barry was talking about, the drift of centre-right and even liberal parties into populist ground, and we can see that happening in Ireland in discussions on immigration and other things, is there. And it's part of a trend that is probably a little unexpected, but it's absolutely real, and that's that the far-right populists are abandoning much of their extreme Euroscepticism and deciding to work the European Union as opposed to simply oppose it. There was a line used during the Brexit debate, which really struck me at the time, which was that pro-Brexit people think the EU is weak, anti-Brexit people think the EU is nice. Both are wrong. The EU doesn't have to be. The EU has been an extraordinary moral force in the world, an extraordinary force for good. It doesn't have to be. And depending on who is elected into power in Europe, you could have a very different focus. You could be looking at a fortress Europe. You could be looking at a xenophobic Europe. You could be looking at a Europe that espouses values that perhaps we wouldn't automatically agree with, and certainly the founders of the European Union wouldn't agree with. And the only way of preventing that happening is to get out and vote for people who won't do that.
That was the basis of my question, and you both kind of answered it. Like Barry, you touched on turnout. Like one of the things at our first event that we held in September, as kind of an ongoing message, is that Ireland's record of being quite good in attendance. That I think in the 2019 elections, we dropped under 50%, and we wanted to keep in and around that. But it is quite concerning when you do see this shift to the right, and I suppose now more than ever to engage now and use your vote is probably as important, because I suppose our democratic process isn't a certainty. It's something that we kind of ongoing have to work on. Like,
totally agree. I'm sorry, I was going to say, Diarmuid, that Freedom House does a democracy index. It's declining 17 years in a row, and I think I read a figure: 7% of people live in full democracies across the planet in 2024, which is an absolutely astonishing figure. That it's as low as 7%, when we all thought the trajectory was in a particular direction for democracy, liberal democracy. And we can see it in the UK, you can see it in the US, you can see it within the European Union. Democracy, we have a democratic recession, that people call it, and as I said, it comes at a cost for people on the margins, people who are vulnerable, people who are subject, vulnerable to discrimination. That's where it hurts, actually. And we've identified a climate emergency and have really legislated very hard for that at the European level. I think we do have a democracy emergency that we're not properly taking seriously. I mean, the European Commission have come up with a democracy action package, but it's nothing like the Green Deal. And it's not taking it seriously. And I agree with you, Daniel. I think it's people think democracy is sort of an heirloom that's handed down from, but it has to be actually fought for by every single, mandate, by every generation, by everybody that supports the idea of it. Has to fight for it and add to it and deepen it and broaden it in whatever way they can. And at the moment, we're having this election, 2 weeks to go. And everywhere I look, there's kind of restrictions on how I campaign, where I can go to campaign, who can run for election, where I can put my posters. There's all sorts of mad restrictions on financing and all of this regulation around democracy. So, at the same time, you're getting so much negativity online about everything you do. Particularly young women are getting terrible time who are candidates. So, there's a perfect storm here, and we're not really taking it seriously. But anyway, on the turnout, I think it would be interesting to see what happens if we think if it goes over 50%, that means there's people coming out that have never voted before, and they're probably not voting for centrist liberal parties. So it'll be interesting to see the turnout, what that tells us. You know, if it goes up to 55%, I think that's people coming out to vote for these new guys with a very different agenda.
I just come in. I did mention some straws in the wind going the other direction, so maybe inject a tiny bit of positivity into it. And not that I disagree with anything Barry's had to say, but one of the things we have seen is more pragmatism among the centre parties, and I think that's very valuable. And the old duopoly of the European People's Party and PES running the European Parliament has very much been extended to include Barry's party, Renew, now, and to include the Liberal parties. And I think that's certainly the way it's going to go for this Parliament. I think you're still going to have a sensible centrist majority. You will just have a much larger extreme wing. You've had splits within the extreme. You have Alternative for Deutschland and Rassemblement National falling out this week. You have very strong opposition to Alternative for Deutschland in Germany itself, and people coming out in the streets and marching. You've had the defeat of populism in Poland. You have had, it's not all a one-way street, and that's not to in any way underestimate the challenge, because the challenge is immense. And what we're in danger of losing is the Europe that those young people in Georgia are out protesting, wanting to be part of, or what young people in Ukraine got out wanting to be part of, which is a Europe of democracy and human rights and personal freedom. And that's very much how they see it. And there is a risk that we go back from that. But the battle isn't lost. We do need to get out there. Now, unfortunately, with my political science hat on, European Parliament elections are second-order elections, and they do tend to be protest elections. But I think Parliament isn't even necessarily where the biggest danger is right now. The biggest danger is actually national governments. And there's a tendency to see this as being a problem with the new member states of Central and Eastern Europe, but it's not. We've just seen a far-right leader elected in the Netherlands. We may see one elected in France. We've had the UK pull out of the European Union. Much of the disruption is coming from the founding member states, not from the new ones, who seem to be valuing their membership of the EU perhaps more and valuing the freedoms that it brought more. So there's definitely difficult times ahead. I do think one of the other things that I was delighted with this week was Ursula von der Leyen coming out and saying that she will not work with ECR in the new Parliament, and presumably not with ID either. So I think that is very much building up towards an EPP PES Renew alliance to actually manage the Parliament over the next 5 years. Now, getting back to Daniel's question, was what happens 5 years afterwards? Well, hopefully the populist fever will have broken. And the best cure for populism seems to be electing populists to power, because then they quickly they're exposed rather quickly in the limitations of what they're doing. As long as they're prevented from undermining the rule of law, as long as they're prevented from undermining democratic institutions, often people seeing them in power is the surest way of not voting them back again. We've seen that with the Five Star Movement in Italy, who swept to elections and then disappeared. We've seen
what
that.
about Orban?
Well, Orban, unfortunately, is undermining democracy. And again, in Italy, it's not quite a clear-cut story, because Five Star
three elections in a row.
Yeah, Orban.
Most governments don't survive anyway, But Orban has, he kind of defies that. I mean, I see where you're coming from. I mean, about the consistent majority, I think that von der Leyen's commission only got in by 9 votes in the last. I wasn't there. Now, I didn't come in till after Brexit, after the Brits left. So, but I'm not sure how stable that majority is. I think there's still a lot of work to do there. But I didn't know that she had ruled out ECR. That's very interesting. I think from the Irish point of view, in terms of one of the things I'm hearing a lot of, particularly from left candidates, but also from new candidates like Ain2 and all that, is that they haven't decided which group, European family, to be a part of. And I know, for example, if I'm elected, there are meetings on the Tuesday after the vote of my group of Renew Europe for newly elected MEPs, for all elected MEPs, and decisions will start to be taken then about chairs, about committees, about files, and how they're distributed. That's when the decisions begin to be taken. Now, everybody who's on Sinn Féin, even Claire Daly and Mick Wallace, they're saying they will go over and start having conversations about which group to belong to. And of course, those groups themselves will have to do due diligence on them, by which time most of these, most of the influence will have already been distributed, if you like. So that's a position that's not really been challenged. I mean, here the left saying, oh, well, we're in a confederal group and there's no whip, but there's no whip in my group. I don't even know what a confederal group is anyway. But these are kind of phrases that are being used. I mean, if a general election candidate says, well, what party are you with? You say, well, I'll decide when I get there. Nobody would take them seriously. But that's essentially what's happening at the moment, and journalists are letting it go. But Diarmuid, you don't think it's a second? You think it is a second order election? You don't think
No,
this
not
can
in terms of
change things?
importance. Not in terms of
Oh,
importance,
but you
but
think
in
it's
terms of how
perceived
the
as
public view it.
yeah. No,
And
that's
in
fair.
terms of how voters behave. Unfortunately, that's the way, and
Yeah.
that's not just in Ireland, that's all over Europe. It shouldn't be, but that is how it's perceived. And it's making the link between the decisions made in Europe and the really important things affecting people's lives. And I mean, some of the work that you've done in Nigeria, some of the work on security and the rest of it is of immense importance and has a direct impact on things like migration flows, which in turn impacts on housing. But people don't necessarily see that. So yeah, unfortunately, in Limerick, we have 3 votes coming up on the 7th of June, which might drive our turnout up a little bit higher. But the focus here is on the mayoral election, followed by the locals, and the Europeans are somewhere, around about the bottom. It is that way, unfortunately. Hopefully it'll change, and hopefully the work of this group and others will help change it, because it needs to change. Because unless we take these elections as seriously as we take normal elections, we'll continue to send candidates. Some candidates, we send some excellent MEPs, and we have one here today, but we will continue to send some candidates that perhaps we shouldn't be sending to Brussels, and other countries will do the same.
Yeah, well, don't get me started on that. I think we've had, So I have a very strong view about the position that's been adopted by the left group. I mean, first of all, I think the left group is on the periphery of decision making, and the European method is so different to the Irish method. There is a majority inbuilt into most of the decision making, and the left make a lot of noise, but they don't make any decisions. They kind of, they're just a sort of protest group. And for a small country to have already 4 MEPs in that group, and potentially, if Sinn Féin do well, up to 6 out of our 14 MEPs in a group that's on the periphery of European politics, for a country that's so pro-EU, is really astonishing. And it does demonstrate a lack of connectivity between people's general attitude towards the European Union and their attitude to the selection of MEPs for the parliamentary elections. And our challenge, or my challenge, is partly to try to really force people to confront that paradox. To say, well, it doesn't make sense to be pro-EU and send, to give away your votes, to give away your MEP seats to non-influential groups. I mean, with nobody in S&D or PES, as you call it. And that needs to be addressed too.
Just to pick up on one thing that was said there, guys, and it's probably a question. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but as we've mentioned there, like we like in this country and probably in other European, we view an MEP as a retirement home for our parliamentarians or for an up-and-coming candidate to build a platform, and not really viewed as where the MEP is. As we've discussed, most of our laws come from Europe. Do you think there's a mindset change that's needed within Irish political parties to reevaluate the value that they put on their MEP over and above maybe our TDs or equal to maybe our TDs and maybe over our council elections?
Yeah, 100%. I think that we've had a whole generation of Irish politicians, Alan Kelly, Mary Lou, Simon Coveney, that kind of gone to Europe for 20 minutes and then, to get ready to be a national politician. And then you have people going after national politics. Now, technically, I am one of those, but Brian Hayes, Francis Fitzgerald, and they do one term. And you cannot be influential in one term. So last year, right now, we've 13 MEPs. Only 2 of them were MEPs at the beginning of the previous mandate. So without seniority, without longevity, without service, you lose influence. And it is just a churn of different people. Matt Carthy got elected and left. Peadar Tobin is proposing to get elected and leave. So I remember when I left politics because involuntarily I lost my seat in 2011. I had an option to go to the Senate to contest the Dáil again, but I didn't want to do that. I said, but that's it, done my bit. And then I explained to you earlier, I got in because of Brexit. I wanted to do something additional. But I said at the time in 2019, my commitment is for 2 terms. And people laughed at me saying, oh, well, you better get the first term out of the way. And that was probably a fair point. But I really think we don't take that seriously enough at all. The value of having, you know, a little bit of service there, taking it seriously as an end in itself. So that's why I'm very pleased to be running again. If I'm lucky enough to get elected, I will be able to insist on more influence in terms of files, in terms of positions, coordinator, maybe a vice chair, maybe something, head of a delegation. You know, I tried to be effective in the time I was there, but because I missed the first 8 months, I was at a huge disadvantage. And because I was a first termer, I was a huge disadvantage. And because it was COVID, I was at a disadvantage. So this time, I really hope to be there immediately after the election if I get elected, to get stuck in straight away.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to remember Joachim Fischer from UL was at an event of ours a few months ago. And he had mentioned, like, you know, he spoke about Ireland's kind of place in the EU and how we've had such influential people, not just in the parliament, but, you know, across all the institutions. And he had said a statistic that quite surprised me about, like, how a lot of those people are now coming up towards retirement age. And there's not young people there to kind of come in and take those kind of positions and to sort of go forth in the EU and really bring, like, Ireland's influence, we'll say, back there. And I think that also creates, I don't know, maybe the disconnect that we also have with Europe of, like, Ireland's so small, what influence can it have when really a small nation can be quite influential. I mean, you know, like the president of the European Parliament is from Malta. So, you know, quite small states can have such an influence. And I think it's important that, like we kind of touched on, that our national media kind of can touch on that as well, and that we can see it, I guess, for the younger generations to see that as well.
I can on that, because I think there is a little bit of a good news story here. The first thing is, you're absolutely right. I mean, we had people like Catherine Day, like Fitzgerald early on, and moving through the years since we joined, who held very senior positions within the Commission, within the institutions. And I think it's at that level that Ireland was punching above its weight. And then for a period, we sort of stopped doing that. And that's from the 1990s onwards. And we didn't take up all of our allocated positions, and we didn't get all the people in that we could get in. And there was a definite problem. Now, a couple of years ago, Micheál Martin launched a new program with fairly significant funding behind it to try and get Irish people into the institutions to work as seconded national experts, to work as national experts in training, to work for 3 months, 6 months, 3 years, 5 years with the Commission on these temporary contracts, which aren't as limited in terms of numbers, which give you the ability to actually have some influence. And that program has been running extremely well over the last number of years. I'm actually off to Brussels in October myself as part of it. I'm going to be there for a few months. But it's, you know, there has been a very definite change in approach there, and it is since Brexit, and it was particularly under Micheál Martin's time as Minister for Foreign Affairs, and his first term as Minister for Foreign Affairs. So things are moving in that direction. I think we still send very high quality commissioners. We tend to nominate people of very high quality to the Court of Auditors, and to the other institutions. And we do elect good MEPs, just not all of them. And you know, we've elected an independent MEP from Munster who went on to be president of the European Parliament, Pat Cox, and we've elected people who've had genuine influence. And our current commissioner is a former MEP. That we elected and was then elevated from Parliament to the Commission. So I think, you know, we should really count her as a third MEP who'd still be there for the full period if she hadn't been promoted. But yeah, we just have to be more careful. There are good people running. There are good people going forward. There are people who would make a very definite contribution. And yes, there are people who are there because it's a way of building a profile towards a run for the Dáil, or it's a way of building a profile towards a run for the presidency, or towards something else. And really, that should be treated in the manner it is. And that requires an educated electorate. It requires an electorate who are prepared to take the vote seriously, and perhaps vote differently in the European election to how they might vote in a local or a national election, to consider how things operate at the European level, and which parties to back. And, the traditional parties in Ireland, probably because they were the traditional parties, are all Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and Labour. I know they sort of died a death recently, but they were all tied in very closely to the major political movements in Europe. And any MEPs from those parties tend to have a lot of power and influence within the European Parliament when they get elected. But that's the first part, and that's the job of the voters.
Yeah, I do agree with all of that, and and then just on the positive side, as I wrote about a kind of crisis of influence. I made my points about the Parliament already. You made the point, Deirdre, that I think the figure is less than 10% of our European Commission Irish people are under 40. We're aging out, and the British leaving the European Parliament was a crucial alignment in the Council that we've lost. So when you read it all together, it looks pretty bleak. But then you look back and you say, we almost got the European Banking Authority. We tied with Paris on that. We have the chief economist of the European Central Bank got himself into a bit of trouble there this week for this kind of subject that he was talking about. But also, Pascal Donoghue, who's in the second term as Eurozone president. You mentioned it, you referred to the European Court of Auditors. So we still have a high stock. But yeah, we need to invest in that. Irish people going to work there. The second language is a problem, even though Irish is now a second language. So we would say it's an area we need to work on definitely in the next while. I mean, there's just so many opportunities. When I left college in the 80s, Europe was a very attractive option. Now, not so much. And that generation that went in the 1980s, rose to major influence. But as you say, Deirdre, they're aging out.
I'm going to leave our podcast with that, unless anyone has some last words.
I think
I just want to wish Barry to cut in, but wish Barry the very best of luck in the elections. I would not blowing smoke to say that he's the sort of person that we do need back in the European Parliament. And Barry, in a previous life, I was a Fine Gael politician, so it's not party based.
I heard that.
Genuine appreciation for the work that you're doing.
I think just to close, we have our European hashtag to engage people to vote. It's hashtag use your vote 24, and maybe just to encourage everyone to log on to the link for the podcast and have a look, because we can see we're coming close to election time now, and the whole idea this is to engage the public and use your vote in whatever direction you think it's best serves you.
Well done, and thank you, Daniel, and thanks to Deirdre for the invitation today. It was great.
Thank you both for coming on.